Hello, and welcome to part one of Decolonization and Nationalism in Africa on Learning the Social Sciences. After World War II, a focus of self-determination rose in Europe once again. What is self-determination? It's the process by which a country determines its own statehood and forms its own allegiances and government. Now, if we look at the age of imperialism and colonies, it seems to contradict the spirit of the Allies who had just fought and won against Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. And even more so, over 200,000 Africans fought in Europe and in Asia for the Allies to attain their freedom and to maintain their democracy. Now, of course, they saw a contradiction in the fact that they were still underneath, for example, Great Britain or underneath France, who they just helped to liberate, and they wanted their own freedom for themselves. Now, in terms of the road to independence after World War II, it was seen that the colonies could not be maintained, especially in Great Britain. A great many speeches were made in Parliament, but it was just seen that they could not maintain these colonies any longer. And so these European nations started to plan long transition periods to independence. However, by the 1950s, the pace started to increase, especially towards the end of the decade. And now 1960 was considered the year of Africa as many nations started to gain their independence. So, a quote from Prime Minister Harold Macmillan in 1960 to the South African Parliament: "The wind of change is blowing through this continent, and whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact. We must all accept it, and our national policies must take account of it." So there's going to be three routes to independence here in Africa. We're going to have a peaceful negotiated independence. This typically happened in non-settler colonies like Ghana, which is what we're going to be focusing on here in this presentation series. The next is going to be a violent process towards independence. That's what we're going to be looking at and examining when we look at Kenya and Algeria. Colonies with larger settler populations typically saw this violent route to gain home rule. And then we're going to have an incomplete independence. That's what we're going to be seeing in South Africa. This is when the white settler population is going to go and take over the political power after the quote unquote independence. And now they are going to continue to maintain power. And for example, in South Africa, it's going to continue on until the 1990s. And then we're going to be seeing a shift and a change in power when Nelson Mandela comes in to the presidency. So today we're going to be focusing on Algeria and a settler colony in Africa seeking its independence. So settler colonies face different obstacles than non-settler colonies as Europeans in the country pushed back against independence movements. Algeria had roughly 1 million settlers and some who strongly supported the French. Kenya had roughly 40,000 settlers, and they became frustrated with the slow pace for freedom and other obstacles. Now, in terms of Algeria, if we go back, they were underneath Ottoman control. Now, the French take over Algeria in 1830. King Charles was trying to save his rule and take Algeria as a way to show his power. And what does he use for his excuse to go in and colonize Algeria? Well, we've got the fly whisk incident. Now, Napoleon, back long ago, no, not that long ago, bought grain from Jewish Algerian merchants when he invaded Egypt, and he never paid them back. Subsequent rulers of France also did not pay Algeria back. And trust me, if you are feeding an army, that's a lot of grain. Now, when the governor called upon the French council to settle the matter, the French council was obstinate and he would not go and allow for the money to be repaid. Now, this was obviously an issue. However, when the Algerian ruler started to say, "Hey, what about me actually like writing the king and that stuff?" Well, the French council became more obstinate, and well, the governor, Hussein Dey, picked up his Flyswatter, and smacked Pierre Duval with it. Now, of course, this was him reacting, as he later was quoted, to the persona of the individual he was talking with. He was not slapping a la France, and he was not slapping with his fly swatter, King Charles X. However, the incident is going to be blown out of proportion, and this is going to be, long story short, the reason for France to send in troops to Algeria and then to colonize it. And of course, there's more to the story, but we don't have time to do that. Now, in terms of Algeria after World War II, there's plenty of inequalities. If we're looking at people with European ancestry versus Algerian ancestry, the average farm holdings we have 123.7 compared to 11.6 with Algerians. The annual earnings from farms, Algerians would roughly earn 2,800 pounds from their farms, while Algerians would earn around 100 pounds. In terms of annual earnings in 1955, we have Europeans for ancestry earning 450,000 francs and Algerians earning about 16,000 francs. Now, some political gains came under Bloom in the 1930s. 25,000 of 6 million Algerian Muslims received citizenship, and Jews received citizenship, but not Muslims in 1870. That came as a specific degree, but of course, that's going to be causing some hostilities, as others are going to be like, why do we not get our citizenship? Now, in terms of the drive for independence, we have an event happening in 1945 on the 1 year anniversary of France's liberation, and we have an anti colonial demonstration going on, and they clash with police and settlers in the countryside, and we have 103 people getting killed. Now, France responds with massacres, arrests, air raids, and settler vigilante violence, where we have then roughly 10,000 to 45,000 people getting killed in this event. Now, in 1954, things also change. France, who has been fighting Vietnam, who had claimed their independence in 1945, seems to be losing. And they do lose the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. When they lose this battle, they move for peace and for Vietnam to go and choose its own path. Well, it's not really going to choose its own path. That's going to be a little different in terms of the peace treaty, but Vietnam is now no longer going to be a colony of France. And this now is going to be giving Algeria the morale and that push to go and drive for their own independence. And so we're going to have this organization get created in 1954, the Front de Libération Nationale, or the FLN. And they are going to be going and focus on a secular path for independence. There were countrywide attacks on various locations and groups of people in 1954. They focused on police and military and communication networks. And one area, in terms of them launching their big attacks, was attacked too soon, which then alerted other areas to be ready for possible attacks. This event that happened in 1954 is going to be the start of the civil war for independence in Algeria. Now, the FLN fought a guerrilla style war while also making petitions to the United Nations for them to recognize their nationality, their nationhood. From 1956 to 1957, the FLN launched attacks against urban centers known as the Battle of Algiers. The French sent in 500,000 troops and regained control, but they used brutal measures to do so, even copying some tactics that the Nazis used during World War II. The brutality caused more Algerians then to side for independence than staying with France. This and other events then eventually break the morale back home in France, and Charles de Gaulle stated in 1958 that Algeria could determine their own future. Now, we're going to be having the Evian Accords, and they recognized Algeria as an independent nation. Colonials had two options, though. They could choose French nationality or Algerian nationality. Many formerly French Algerians lose their French nationality if they stay there in Algeria. Immigration from Algeria to France remains high in the 1960s, and now we have some other issues. What is the status of Muslims within France? What is their status in terms of citizenship? Other things. And also, what's going to be going on in terms of the hostilities between Algeria and France, even in the years later? The hatred of the Algerian wars was not kind of left in Algeria. We have people that still move to France and they are still bitter about the events that occurred. They may prefer France and they may prefer to be with France. However, we do have so many events that, mark people's lives for years to come. Anyway, many groups also came to France looking for work. However, in those initial years, they are economically useful but culturally segregated from the rest of France. Now, in terms of Kenya for their independence movement, because they are also a settler nation, most Kenyans were upset by the loss of rights as landowners to the British when they came in and took over. They believed that their land was taken unfairly, and opposition groups began to form in the 1920s. For several decades, small bands of armed resistant forces, or guerrillas, fought to eliminate the white settlements. And in 1956, there was a violent rebellion that resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of Africans. Although the British Army mostly defeated the guerrilla warriors, this movement gained support among Kenyans. And so we're going to be having this group come out. It's a secret society of fighters known as the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. However, they're also going to be nicknamed the Mau Mau. And this force saw that kind of going and having some guerrilla warfare tactics and that stuff was the only way for Kenya to gain their independence. And so they fought the British from 1952 to 1960. Great Britain began to rethink its policy on colonization, and on December 12, 1963, the British Empire granted Kenya its full independence. And we have an individual, Kenyatta, who was an extremely influential leader in the freedom movement, being appointed to be the nation's first president. Also, in Nigeria, the country was extremely diverse in terms of ethnic groups, over 250 different ethnic groups. Nigeria had maintained its independence until 1914 when Great Britain took over the area officially. By the end of World War II, Nigerians had started political parties to work for Nigerian independence, and most Nigerians believed that the only way to have rights was to be completely free of European rule. At first, Nigeria was one of the most stable governments in Africa after they gained their independence. Unfortunately, struggles for power have resulted in many military coups over the time period of their nationhood since the 1960s. Nigeria suffered from violence and military rule from 1966 until 1999, when a democratic government was finally established. In recent years, political instability, religious competition, ethnic differences, and the need to become more modern continue to plague Nigeria in terms of looking at a nation from back when they became a colony up into the present. So that was our discussion on nations that had a larger settler population and looking at them now through the guise of their independence movement and coming more to the present. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them down below and I will answer them. Thank you for listening. Bye bye.